Welcome to this PHR SPHR certification class Learning Byte. In this Learning Byte, we'll take a look at calculating overtime and blended overtime rate calculations. Let's begin. This PowerPoint slide represents the handout that's available in the PHR SPHR Resource Center. Let's start by looking at the simple calculation of overtime shown on the left side of the slide. Employee 1 is paid $10 per hour and works 52 hours in a work week. What is Employee 1's gross pay? Well, the first method to calculate overtime would be to take the total hours, in this case 52, times the rate of $10 per hour. This calculation yields $520. Next, we owe 1/2 of the pay rate for the overtime hours. In our example, it'll be 12 overtime hours times the sum of $10 per hour times 0.5. And this calculation yields $60. Gross pay would then be calculated at $520 plus $60 equals $580. Method 2 would be to take 40 hours times the pay rate. In our example, it would be 40 hours times $10 per hour equaling $400. We then owe time and a half, the overtime rate, for the overtime hours. In our example, this would be 12 overtime hours times the sum of $10 per hour times 1.5. And this calculation will yield $180. Gross pay would then be calculated at $400 plus $180, which equals $580. So as you can see, we received the same gross pay utilizing two different overtime pay rate calculations. Now, in calculating overtime when a non-discretionary bonus is paid, or when an employee works at multiple jobs at different pay rates, we need to calculate what is referred to as a blended overtime rate calculation. This calculation is utilizing method 1 for calculating overtime. So let's walk through the example shown on the right side of the slide with employee number 2. Now in this example, the employee is being paid $10 per hour and also receives a $100 non-discretionary attendance bonus during the pay period. What is their gross pay if the employee works 52 hours during a work week? Well, first, we'll take total hours worked times the hourly rate. In this example, it'd be 52 work hours times $10 per hour. And this calculation yields $520. We then add the $100 non-discretionary attendance bonus for a total of $620. We now need to calculate the new regular rate for overtime purposes, blending the hourly pay rate plus the bonus. This is calculated by taking $620 divided by 52 work hours, and this yields $11.92 per hour. We now owe 1/2 of this new rate for all overtime hours. In our example, this would be 12 hours of overtime multiplied by the sum of $11.92 times 0.5. And this calculation yields $71.54. Gross pay is now the sum of our two calculations, $620 plus $71.54, which equals $691.54. The incorrect method would be to take 40 hours times our pay rate of $10 per hour, which yields $400, then pay time and a half for all overtime hours. And that calculation would be 12 overtime hours times the sum of $10 per hour times 1.5, which yields $180. Gross pay would incorrectly be calculated as $400 plus $180, and then adding on our $100 non-discretionary attendance bonus for a total of $680. Now, miscalculation of overtime hours when non-discretionary bonuses and multiple pay rates are worked by the employee are a top wage and hour violation. Now, let's give you a chance to practice this skill. In our example, Mary's paid $15 per hour and works 45 hours in a work week. What is Mary's gross pay? Remember, you can use method 1 or 2 as shown on the previous slide for this calculation. Please pause the video and calculate Mary's gross pay and resume to see how you did. Okay, let's see how you did. Following method 1, we would take $15 per hour multiplied by 45 hours worked for a total of $675. We now owe half the regular rate for all overtime hours. And this is calculated as 5 hours of overtime times the sum of $15 per hour times 0.5 for a total of $37.50. Gross pay is now the total of these two calculations, $675 plus $37.50 for a total of $712.50. Following method 2, we'll take $15 per hour times 40 hours worked for a total of $600. We now owe time and a half of the regular rate for all overtime hours. This will be calculated as 5 hours of overtime multiplied by the sum of $15 per hour times 1.5, which yields $112.50. Gross pay is now the sum of these two calculations, $600 plus $112.50, for a total of $712.50. And as you can see, we received the same result using the two different calculation methods. Now, let's practice a scenario where an employee works overtime at two different jobs paying different hourly pay rates. In this example, Mary works 35 hours in job A, which pays $15 per hour, and 10 hours in job B, which pays $17 per hour. What is Mary's gross weekly pay? As a reminder, you'll need to follow the blended overtime rate calculation we reviewed in the previous slide, where the employee received the $100 non-discretionary attendance bonus. While this example does not include a bonus, we follow the same method for determining gross pay. Pause the video, complete your calculation, and resume to check your answer. Okay, let's check your answer. First, we'll take 35 hours times $15 per hour for time worked on job A, and this yields $525. Next, we will take 10 hours multiplied by $17 per hour for the hours worked in job B, and this yields $170. Adding the two together results in $695. We now need to calculate the new rate for overtime purposes, and this would be calculated by taking $695 divided by 45 total hours worked for a new overtime pay rate of $15.44 per hour. We owe 1/2 of this rate for all overtime hours. This will be calculated as 5 hours of overtime multiplied by the sum of $15.44 times 0.5, which equals $38.60. Gross pay is now calculated at $695 plus $38.60 for a total of $733.60. Great job. While we cannot guarantee or predict if you'll have any math calculations on your exam, calculating overtime and blended overtime rate calculations is an important skill to possess as an HR professional. Be sure to see our other learning bites for more math calculations, such as compa ratios, yield rates, and adverse impact analysis. And I wish you the best in your exam preparation.